Good afternoon, everyone. I wish we could wait a few more minutes before starting this session, but I'm afraid we're gonna running late in the end. So, good afternoon, everyone. Before introducing our esteemed panelists, I would like to convey my gratitude to UNIDO for having me here as part of the newly established Youth Advisory Group that reflects the organization's commitment to advancing the UN Youth Strategy and the SDGs at large. My name is Melissa Tomassini, and I've had the honor to advise UNIDO's personnel for almost 2 years now on how to meaningfully engage young generations' needs and aspirations into its programming. But now let's warmly welcome our esteemed panelists who will be exchanging valuable views on financing industrial decarbonization in the lead up to G20. The decarbonization of heavy industries like steel, cement, and concrete is still not moving at the pace required to achieve the emission reductions needed by 2030 and 2050. While there are many cost-effective solutions that can be readily deployed, some technologies are capital-intensive and require transformation of industrial processes to enable this shift. During this side event, the actions needed to speed up and drive this process will be presented. Specifically, the main highlights of the UNIDO LeadIT report, produced in collaboration with the leadership group for the industry transition, will be shared. The analysis will then be complemented with the latest findings by the OECD on financing industrial decarbonization in emerging and developing countries, and on how to address the scarcity of financial and technical assistance offered by international financing institutions to heavy industry decarbonizations in these regions. It is a great pleasure to have such a wealth of knowledge on stage. We have with us Ms. Mondini, who has joined us online. She's policy coordinator of the leadership group on the industry transition at UNIDO, and Ms. Nurzat Misalieva, senior energy expert at UNIDO as well, who will be both presenting the LeadIT report. After this, we will kick off panel discussion with Mr. Dagger Senjing, industry program lead at OECD, Ms. Elvira Luther, program and research manager within the Climate and Energy Fund at the Industrial Federal Government, Austria Federal Government, apologies, and Mr. Daniel Morris, who's Senior Climate Change Specialist and Clean Energy Lead for the Climate Investment Funds. Ms. Mondini, we have the honor to have you join us. You're currently focusing on mapping international technical and finance assistance for industrial decarbonization. Ms. Mondini, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Melissa, for the introduction. Can you hear me well? Just making sure.
Yes, we do. Please go ahead.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Thanks a lot for the introduction, and thanks a lot to UNIDO for having us. As Melissa said, I am a policy coordinator at the LeadIT Secretariat, and I am going to give you a brief introduction into LeadIT's work on financial assistance for heavy industry decarbonization in emerging markets and developing countries. LeadIT has been doing some work on international assistance for heavy industry decarbonization. We published a piece last year on assistance for steel decarbonization specifically. And this year, in the context of our commitment to the Steel Breakthrough Agenda, we are finalizing a piece on assistance for heavy industry decarbonization more broadly that will be published in the next couple of weeks just ahead of COP. Let me just quickly share my screen, and I will give you a brief introduction into what, or brief overview into what that will be. Just give me a second. Let's see if this works. Okay. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Fantastic. Thank you. Okay. So just for context, giving a little bit of an introduction into the challenges in emerging markets and developing countries specifically. heavy industry decarbonization in emerging markets and developing countries faces a suite of complex and interlinked challenges, significant real and perceived investment risk, often partly leading to higher costs of capital. State and technical capacity to develop enabling environments is often limited, as is renewable energy penetration. This also bearing in mind, of course, that the bulk of the increase in demand for industrial products expected in the next couple of years will be from emerging markets and developing countries, creating, of course, a need for assistance, specifically targeting heavy industry decarbonization, really lowering the barriers and increasing the incentives for investments in decarbonization, which is where international financial institutions, or IFIs, come in. IFIs have or can play a key role in de-risking investments for first movers in industrial decarbonization and building up critically needed capacity with both public and private stakeholders. Broadly speaking, assistance provided by IFIs can be categorized into 6 types. For technical assistance at 4 levels and 2 types of financial assistance. So we have technical assistance at the government level, which is anything from formulation of transition plans, policies, regulations, just kind of development of enabling environments. Sectoral level, which often has to do with the development of sectoral pathways. At the corporate level, which can be the development of climate governance structures and formulation of decarbonization pathways. And technical assistance at the project level, which is everything to do with project planning and implementation. And then direct financial assistance and risk mitigation instruments. And what we did in the context of the publication that I mentioned in the beginning is we built a high-level mapping of the extent to which a long list of 23 IFIs provide assistance along these 6 categories. And what you see here is the result of that analysis, which where it is noticeable that, of course, this is a quite nascent space where quite few IFIs do provide such specifically targeted assistance. It is important to stress here that the scope of this analysis is assistance that, as I said, is specifically targeting heavy industry decarbonization, as opposed to regular instruments that are used for it on a case-by-case basis. And it also doesn't take into account the extent to which IFIs participate in specific programs. For instance, the 6 MDBs that participate in CIF's industry decarbonization program as implementing partners. But still, it's pretty clear that this is a nascent space. The second piece of analysis that we did is going into a bit more detail into specific assistance programs or strategies that either focus specifically on heavy industry decarbonization or include it as a focus area. And the purpose here is to show in a bit more detail what kind of instruments they provide. The example that you see on the screen is CIF's industry decarbonization program, but this is really just to kind of show what we did. It's a busy slide, a lot of text, no need to read it all. Also because we will for sure hear later from Daniel a lot about this. But this is just to kind of show the next piece of analysis that we did. Our analysis revealed a number of kind of cross-cutting gaps and shortcomings to existing assistance and approaches. The first one being, as I said, sheer availability, with only a few IFIs, as I said, offering dedicated assistance, and there being only a few specifically dedicated programs at this point yet. So it will be important going forward, not only to develop new instruments and programs, but also, first of all, to fund existing programs and make sure that they achieve meaningful leverage and also provide successful proofs of concept initially. A second observation that we made is that there tends to be rather little public, detailed, and easily accessible information about assistance available, its functioning, and levels of financing available. How IFIs coordinate among each other, for instance, working at different levels in the same country, and how they communicate and co-create with different stakeholder groups. And while there are certainly bilateral communication channels which clarify a lot of this, publicly available and streamlined information can help all stakeholder groups relevant to heavy industry decarbonization not only get involved in relevant projects and initiatives, but also to evaluate the extent to which assistance available is fit for purpose. So it will be important going forward to streamline public information and ensure that all stakeholders have access to it, which is also in line with the recommendations of the Task Force on Access to Climate Finance. And finally, given the need to maximize the impact of resources available, there is a need to transition to coordinated, integrated approaches. On the one hand, the stakeholder landscape relevant to heavy industry decarbonization is a very broad and complex one, encompassing fund providers, recipient governments, IFIs, commercial financiers, corporates in the industry, and civil society. And on the other hand, given the gigantic amount of investments needed, assistance available is likely to be inherently scarce. And these two factors combined really create a situation in which it is important that all stakeholders involved come together and provide their unique contribution, where based on their mandate, their resources, and their expertise, they can make the contribution that has the most transition impact. So given the importance of avoiding the addition of new high carbon assets in this current decade, tackling these different pieces obviously urgent and imperative. And I'm sure colleagues on the panel will have a lot more to say as to how we can achieve this. Over to you, Melissa.
Okay. Thank you very much, Ms. Mondini, for the amazing work conducted to having this critical report out. Actually, there are still a few weeks to go before seeing it released, as well as for highlighting key elements and frameworks, both in the technical and financial, both in technical and financial terms, to ramp up deployment of low carbon options in the short and long term. Ms. Mirsalieva, since you're working on global programs such as the Industrial Energy Accelerator to drive industrial energy efficiency, do you have any additional inputs from a UNIDO perspective that you would like to highlight?
Okay. Thank you so much. I will provide inputs, additional comments of things that we have observed while drafting this report, and focus maybe on some of the key recommendations that we have actually elaborated. So the very first recommendation that we have come up with is due to the fact that steel, cement, and other heavy industries, the lifetime of the assets is about 40 years, and one investment cycle is about 25 years. It's actually very important for countries to do a long-term planning and to provide a long-term vision for industry decarbonization and transformation processes, yeah? And therefore, we actually encourage within the paper all the countries to develop industry roadmaps for industry decarbonization, which would outline long-term and medium-term vision for the industry sector, so that actors in this space could plan their next investment cycles when it comes, which we actually, if you think about it, 2050 is only one investment cycle away, and therefore actually the next decade is quite important to make sure that that planning takes place taking into account the net zero goals of the Climate Paris. That's actually number one recommendation that we make. The second recommendation that we make is around financing. A lot has been said about the importance of the financing for this sector, and this is because the deep decarbonization technologies are still not commercially available yet, and they're not available yet at scale. But we do need those decarbonization technologies if we want to really achieve decarbonization of the heavy industries. And therefore, what is really important is to make low-cost financing available for these decarbonization technologies. at the moment, globally, these technologies are only operating at pilot cases, mostly in some of the plants are in Europe and the USA, but really, if you look about the global space, there is a tremendous need to make the dedicated financing available, and I think my colleagues from will talk about the financing instruments. Also because it is important to provide low-cost financing for these technologies because the space, the steel, cement, and concrete industries, it's a very competitive space. And if they have to introduce expensive technologies, it obviously reflects on the price of the commodity, right? And it's a very competitive environment. So to help companies and industries to make that investment decision, you really need to provide the support and actually pay for that green premium that comes with low carbon cement or low carbon steel, etc. Third recommendation has to do with the fact and the trends that most of the growth, both in terms of the consumption and the production of the steel, cement, and concrete, is going to take place in emerging economies and developing countries in the next coming decade. At the same time, these are the countries that have poor infrastructure and they lack capacities and resources to actually invest in heavy, expensive decarbonization technologies. And therefore, it is very important to target financial assistance towards developing countries and emerging economies where we're going to observe the growth of both in the demand and supply of these industries. Yeah? And maybe another two more recommendations that we put in place. Another one is we have to make sure, one of the major reasons or problems why right now we don't have a thriving market of low carbon steel, cement, and concrete or like industrial products, because there is no demand for such products. So it is actually important to stimulate demand for this product. And we are asking governments to step up through green public procurement policies to generate this initial demand for low carbon industrial products so that the companies would be more stimulated and encouraged to actually invest in such heavy technologies and to transform the industrial processes. Of course, there are many other recommendations. I would just touch upon one more recommendation that we've made, is an importance of international collaboration when it comes to regulating the sector. If you take steel, for example, it's an internationally traded commodity. It's a very competitive product. The price, if increase or decrease, makes a huge difference. And if countries dare to introduce policies like green public procurement, then we all sort of need to agree what does it make like low carbon steel, yeah? So we need to agree on the approaches, on the standards, on definitions of what do we understand by low carbon cement or low carbon steel, so that we still make sure that we create an even playing field for these industries, yeah? Right now, there are a lot of initiatives taking place on coming up with different standards and definitions for these products. Unless and it's important to, we probably cannot harmonize to 100%, it's not impossible. It's not probably, it will be very difficult, but at least achieve some sort of harmonization so that we don't have a fragmented market in the future. I think that would be the key takeaways from this report that we came up with for the countries to take forward the industry decarbonization agenda, specifically focusing on the heavy industries. Thanks a lot.
Many thanks, Ms. Salieva, for this brief yet comprehensive overview of the current decarbonization challenges and solutions. UNIDO is indeed at the forefront of clean energy infrastructure and product development that address resource efficiency and material circularity. But now let's deep dive into the available financing mechanisms and frameworks, related barriers and needs through a panel discussion among our invited speakers in the House. Mr. Saijing, in your current role at the Environment Directorate of OECD, you are leading the industry decarbonization program. Based on the three forthcoming OECD reports and working papers, what are some of the financing solutions we need to currently foster industry decarbonization in emerging and developing countries? And above all, do you see a need to strengthen the offering for technical assistance on industrial decarbonization globally?
Thank you. I guess this works. Thank you for that. First of all, congratulations for this event and the side event specifically. My director was speaking at the previous high-level panel, and she mentioned there the Climate Club, which responds in a way to the recommendations which we've heard today, and for this forthcoming report from the LeadIT. There is a need for, first of all, coordination of all the financing available, technical assistance available. Together with the UNIDO team and as the interim secretary of the Climate Club, as OECD and the IEA, we are finalizing a matchmaking platform. So this is a global platform which will bring the donors and the recipients, beneficiary countries together to exchange on the financing, but also on the available technical assistance offer for industry decarbonization. More details will be available at the COP once it's launched. Now, the reason why I'm saying this, and we've been hearing a lot on financing, what exactly do we mean actually with the financing? The ultimate objective is obviously to mobilize and unlock private capital. That's the key. All those de-risking measures, public finance interventions, etc., all should be leading to that. So strategically using public resources, public finance, which is especially very scarce in emerging economies, and considering the many other priorities these countries have beyond energy and climate and industry transformation, it is very important to keep that in mind. And then the other part, so that's the public finance, but then the other part is the, a spectrum of enabling conditions. That's probably the priority before it comes to public finance for creating an environment for investments. Now, this is the core of the work of the OECD, where we collaborate with various emerging economies, so non-OECD countries. It's important to understand for industry, it is not just a steel mill or it's a cement kiln. We need to think of the entire value chain, from the supply of raw materials. We've heard scrap today several times. We've heard energy, so hydrogen as a feedstock or fuel. Then the production of the materials, but then what do you do with them? The use of the products and then their end of life. So across this value chain, it's necessary to keep in mind there are different types of barriers, risks, that need to be overcome with different instruments and solutions. So it is necessary to keep that in mind, and I'll try to elaborate based on those. I think when you look at the, let's say, the upfront production part, so we heard about hydrogen, we know it's very capital intensive. We heard about steel, we always talk about green steel. And when I say green steel, let's take the example of a direct reduced iron. So producing iron from iron ore, but also with scrap, using hydrogen as a fuel or as a reducing agent. The investment cost for this, and for a small plant of 1 million tons per year, it's $1 billion. So a small iron plant with renewable hydrogen costs $1 billion. This is a huge amount of money. Another issue, let's assume one decides to invest in this, how do you access that money? That's the other point. And then how are we going to discount this investment throughout the lifetime? And when I say discount, it's obviously the weighted average cost of capital or simply the cost of capital. This is becoming a big issue. Again, a number. Today, the best projects for hydrogen, green hydrogen, is about $3 a kilogram with a, let's say, cost of capital of about 10%. If you double that from 10% to 20% cost of capital, it goes more than $5 a kilogram. Just the impact of cost of capital, keep all the other parameters the same. Then you have the OPEX, so that's the production processes, and then the product use. So that's also an issue. So each of these areas requires a different type of solution. And let me give a few financing instruments from the paper that will come in a few weeks from the OECD side. For the CAPEX side, for the production assets, we hear a lot of instruments like Viability Gap Fund, concessional loans. I think we've heard that today throughout the conference already. But what's key here is that the both international and national financing sources need to be explored. We've heard today the IFI role, so that's key, but also within the countries themselves, public finance or let's say different types of instruments that are locally provided could play a role. Another issue is on the current local currency use, which is subject to risks and volatility. So their currency exchange fine type of instruments could be important. And you need a suite of de-risking measures for the rest of the value chain. You know, blended finance, insurance guarantees, a few examples that can help to lower the cost of capital. Maybe less possible for emerging economies, but contract for differences, provided that there's also a carbon market, then a carbon contract for difference type of instruments are showing to be successful in some OECD countries. And finally, the offtake part is key, so the product use. If there is no consumer for your green steel, for your green cement, it's a big issue. We just heard you need to create demand. Without that, the cost of capital will be high, nobody will invest in that project, or better not invest in that project if you cannot sell it. So the final point, and I will just try to combine it with what I said at the beginning, I said mobilizing private capital. In the power sector, we see quite a large intervention or a growing intervention from institutional investors, which are very different risk-return profile. For industry, this could also be an important source of finance, but they are very careful on the risks that are posed by the local currency and the exchange rates. So also instruments to overcome such risk could utilize new sources of private capital like institutional investors, and this is an area which is seeming to attract some attention. So these are a few things which I wanted to share, and these are workable or working instruments. And in our forthcoming paper, you'll see more with actual real projects, how they have been applied, and I'm happy to share that in a few weeks with you. Thank you.
Many thanks, Mr. Saijin. The transition to low-carbon technologies in the steel and cement sectors is indeed hindered by high upfront capital costs, as you were rightly highlighting, and it is clear that these challenges can be overcome through international cooperation to increase investment risks, to reduce investments risks, lower the cost of capital, and ultimately facilitate the mobilization of private capital towards industry transition. But now let's zoom in a bit on Austria, the country that is generously hosting us. Ms. Luther is responsible for the design and management of the National Energy Research and Innovation Programs at the Austrian Federal Government's Climate and Energy Fund. Looking at the Austrian government's contribution to the sector, what are some of the financing schemes available for industry in Austria to drive industrial decarbonization? And what can be shared from Austria's experience with other countries?
Yes, thank you very much for the nice introduction and also for the invitation. Yes, I can confirm what the previous speakers told you, that we in Austria, let's say, we did what is in your recommendations and it's working. What we started, let's say, the Austrian Climate and Energy Fund, we are owned by the Ministry of Climate Action. We receive the funds from them. And our role is, let's say, to bring results from research into the market. And since more than 10 years now, we are working on industrial decarbonization in the energy research program. And we started with the roadmap. And the aim was to find out where research is still needed. And also other supporting instruments, and yes, to develop, let's say, start building trust with industry. Because when we started working, industry was, let's say, questioning what the Austrian Climate and Energy Fund is wanting from them. And after 1 year, they had trust, and what they started then also, let's say, to submit projects to the call for proposals. In 2015, then we started, let's say, the energy research program is low TRL levels and technology open, and we have one topic is industrial decarbonization. In 2015, then we started an innovation initiative called the Flagship Region Energy. It was a mission-oriented program. It was, let's say, a combination of research, which is very close to the market, and demonstration funding. So we used two different funding schemes. And let's say this was the first initiative where we said that we will have 3 calls for projects. And there were the 3 project regions, or flagship regions, how we called them. And there was always a coordinator for each region. And one of these regions was the so-called New Energy for Industry. And this was a very successful one. And I think there we can share, let's say, the experience. Because what these coordinators of the flagship region, they received also funding. They went to industry in order to convince them to take a look on the different industrial sites where there is innovation necessary, and they accompanied these industry players in the whole application process, and also together with them identified the technology providers, because they are very important. We don't have the technologies yet for industrial decarbonization on industrial scale, so they identified, let's say, what is available on the market, and to find the solutions. And yes, also, let's say, one was, we had this cross-clusteral approach. For example, if you have a heat pump, and it was demonstrated in the food industry, in the cement industry, and also in the steam industry. And so the technology provider could see the different, how this technology is working in the different environments. Yes, which at the end then also helps them to bring it faster to the market. And yes, let's say, and now the next step, what is, let's say, based on the experience we had in the flagship region energy, this year we started a new, bigger program, also more closer to the market. It's so-called transformation of industry. We have in total 3 billion euros for industrial decarbonization, which for Austria is really a very high amount. And 10% of this funding is for R&D. And there we fund also research projects and demonstration projects. And in the demonstration projects, it's very important, let's say, that government is taking risk, that they don't have to, let's say, it's also possible that the technology does not work. And that it's not going into, let's say, real operation, because they need to see if it's working or not. And if it's working, maybe they don't want to use anymore the pilot plant and go up into the next step. And yes, what can other countries learn? What you need is a mission-oriented program. So the government's, let's say, industry and research is having the ideas and not the government. Then cover the whole chain of innovation. You need community building and the ecosystem. And the next step, I think, for Austria, and this is why I'm here for Mission Innovation, where we started, is international cooperation, because it's necessary that all countries worldwide don't make the same mistakes again. Because if they, let's say, have one technology, it's not working, they should share their experience and learn what is working. And so we need, at the end, less money. And we are coming in a shorter time to reach industrial decarbonization.
Thank you very much, Ms. Luder, for highlighting Austria's valuable contribution. in converting industrial sector to achieve the climate targets set in the Paris Agreements. I shall recall that the country is committed to achieving carbon neutrality by 2040 at the latest, so 10 years earlier than the ambition set by the European Union. Mr. Morrison, you've spent 15 years working on the frontiers of policy, finance, economics to build lasting solutions to the climate crisis. As the clean energy and industry lead at Climate Investment Funds, one of the largest multilateral climate funds, would you like to tell us how it is contributed to unlocking financing for industrial decarbonization? And who are the first countries you see ready to start such programs? And are projects in emerging countries financially ready?
Thanks, Melissa, and appreciate the opportunity to be here and join this great panel to talk about one of the most popular topics of the day, which is industry decarbonization in emerging economies, which is nice because a year ago we were having these conversations and it was very much focused on what that means for countries in the north and what the experience is. And over the past year, there's been a real recognition in the international community that we need to be focusing on this type of work in developing countries and emerging markets. And so we in the climate investment funds have been actively supporting climate projects in emerging markets and developing economies for the past 15 years. Our reason for being is basically to help the international financial community and specifically multilateral development banks figure out how to do climate finance. And the way that we help to do that is by providing concessional resources, money that can handle a lot of different activities and reduce the risk of certain activities in a way that allows the MDBs to get into spaces where they currently aren't comfortable going by themselves. So what that means for industry decarbonization is that we're sort of at the beginning stages of that. And you've heard many people today ask about financing. Where does financing come from? How do we mobilize the type of finance necessary to do the work that needs to be done at the scale that needs to be done? It's important to point out that I think about 80% of emissions related to industry decarbonization are coming from developing countries. And we expect that number to increase over time because that is where so much of the growth is going to happen. Our friends at UNIDO have this great quote that I use all the time, which is, the world will essentially build a new New York City every month for the next 40 years in terms of material, in terms of infrastructure. And so what that means is how we need to start investing in the type of activities and the type of infrastructure that can ensure that that is as low carbon as much as possible. Nersrat said it best, investment cycles are 25 years, and we're at the beginning of the investment cycle that will get us to 2050. So what we in the climate investment funds are looking to do is bring our concessional finance to bear across industry and across different countries using our model, which we think is quite impactful and compelling. It essentially requires countries, MDBs, and other stakeholders in this space, private sector, civil society, to come together and figure out what an investment plan for a specific sector looks like. We provide an envelope of concessional resources that can leverage more investments coming forward. So in our clean tech spaces, our leverage ratio is about 1 to 10. So if we're bringing, $50 or $100 million to the table in a specific country, we expect that can mobilize anywhere between 500 to $1 billion in additional resources coming from MDBs, coming from the private sector, coming from other sources. With private sector in particular, we have a great success rate. About a third of our co-financing over the years has come from the private sector. For industry decarbonization, that's going to be critically important. You've heard a number of people talk today about the importance of private sector and how private sector needs to be in the lead, both at the firm level and, as Degar was saying, at the institutional investor level. So I think when it comes to firms and working in country, our new industry decarbonization program is built to ensure that those activities are a part of a country's investment plan from the beginning. So this program has specific requirements for private sector to be involved. Within a country's envelope of resources, there needs to be at least 20%, if not up to 80%, dedicated to direct private sector financing. These are public resources going to the private sector at concessional levels to help them do things that they wouldn't do on their own in different technologies, right? A lot of the talk in these venues and others is on cement, steel, chemicals, even metals like aluminum. Those are all very important, but our program is meant to be flexible and to cover a number of different industry sectors that maybe aren't always front of mind when you have these conversations. That includes things like shipping and low emissions shipping. It could include other things like textiles or glass and things like that. So the point of the program is to be really flexible. It's to facilitate private sector investment, make sure that they're engaged from the beginning, but it's also to ensure that whatever activity happens, it fits within the framework of a just transition. So another requirement of our program is that workers who are engaged at all levels of industrial activity are a part of this conversation from the beginning. The types of activities that can benefit a factory or an industrial scale operation might make sense when we're in a room and reading papers, but the workers on the ground can see something different. And so having them engaged from day one and ensuring that the types of activities that are being proposed are viable when it comes to reducing emissions, but also can ensure that people's livelihoods are considered, are protected where possible, and if there needs to be a transition to different types of work, the types of activities that are necessary to ensure that transition are considered as part of the equation. So that's a little bit about the program. Melissa, you asked about countries that we see sort of emerging. I'll say that our program right now does not have, it doesn't have a set of countries in which it's expected to work. We're keeping it open, and eventually, once we are properly capitalized at a level we think is sufficient, we'll do a call for proposals and encourage countries to come forward and apply to be a part of the program. So that's an area where the roadmaps that colleagues at UNIDO and OECD are working on will really benefit a country, give them a leg up to get access to the resources. But many of you have been part of these conversations, know who's out there, know which countries are really interested in doing this kind of work, and those are the ones that we expect to come forward. So I guess very quickly I'll put them in sort of two categories. There's the major emerging economy category, those economies that have a strong industrial base and continue to grow it. So Brazil, South Africa, India, Indonesia, Turkey. We expect that they'll be very active and excited to participate in the program, and we're certainly looking forward to seeing what they propose to participate. But there's another group of countries that I think require attention as well, and those that maybe are not traditionally thought of as having a strong industrial base or a big industrial base, but are still active in specific sectors. So earlier today there was a conversation where there were a number of African countries talking about their involvement in the cement sector. We would want to give countries like that an opportunity to access these resources and make sure that they can take advantage of what we think of as the transformational power of our concessional resources. So we want to be able to benefit the big players, the smaller players as well, and really at the end of the day, find the areas where we can have the most impact, where the application of concessional finance can be the most transformational. So we look forward to launching the program and figuring out where that can happen. And I think we will immensely benefit from the work that colleagues here on the panel, both online and in the room, are doing. that will help us figure out where we can get the biggest bang for our concessional buck.
Thank you very much, Mr. Morris, for sharing how climate investment funds is actually pioneering climate smart planning through long-term financial solutions, especially in developing countries. As we're now approaching the end of this session, I would invite our panelists to deliver a closing statement as a key takeaway from this inspiring session. What is the recommendation you have to the G20 presidency next week with a view to channeling more finance for industrial decarbonization, especially in developing countries? Would you like to start, Ms. Lutter?
Well, let's say, I have to think about it. Yes, maybe let's say that there should be a partnership between the public sector and the financing sector. Because, for example, I think many technology providers will come, let's say, from Western countries, and this new technology for industrial decarbonization. And yes, bringing those technologies to developing countries and have them tailor-made, I think a partnership would be good.
Wonderful. Yeah, over to you.
Thank you. I think we have already done a lot of work in terms of identifying challenges and formulating recommendations how to move forward. And I think one thing that I would recommend is actually to take forward one of those recommendations and action it, put it into action. And I would totally agree with my colleague that another thing that is so important to start acting upon is enhancing the international collaboration on this topic, because without such collaboration, it's going to come to us at a much higher cost.
Yeah, totally agree.
Yeah, thank you. There are a number of things I think the G20 can do, and it'll be interesting next year. Brazil will take on the lead. You heard me mention them before. I think they're very active in this space and very interested in what can happen. There's a benefit from having a leading developing economy in charge of G20 because it can facilitate the sort of conversations that need to be had. One, I think both panelists mentioned it, sort of the sharing of lessons learned, and in particular, to the extent that this work has accelerated in developed OECD, global north countries, there are benefits that then can be brought to those developing economies that want to do the same kind of thing. And I think unlike other spaces, the difference between developed and developing countries is not very high. Like we're all kind of walking the same path at the same time. But in the plenary earlier today, I think you heard Damalola from SE for All say that in developing countries, there's not necessarily a need for a transition plan because that development has to happen from the ground. And so don't even bother transitioning, just immediately get countries on that zero carbon path, which I think is a great way to think about it. And the G20 can definitely facilitate that. One way they can do that is to take advantage of the conversations that are happening here and in other venues. I will say in the industry decarbonization space, there's a lot of activity and there is a lot of existing coordination, more so than I've seen in other spaces. UNIDO is working with OECD or working with, interested governments like Germany, UK, others. They're talking to us. There's a lot of things out there that are already happening. So what the G20 can do is take advantage of existing models, take advantage of existing efforts, financing channels like we have in the CIF that build on the work that the multilateral development banks do, figure out how to get that all in one place and then execute. We don't necessarily need to build new initiatives. We don't need a whole additional infrastructure. Let's take the good work that's been done and figure out how to amplify it as best we can, as quickly as we can.
Thank you. I think this recommendation at the very end was key. And there's no reason to come up with a new initiative, perhaps, to take stock of what's happening already on industry decarbonization, which is a growing and a crowded space already, and to facilitate international cooperation. I think G20 can easily do that. At the end of the day, it's a high-level political, governmental forum, no? So this is one thing which it can easily facilitate. And the second thing is, we talked about finance. For industry, finance will happen one way or another. It's important that it goes in the right direction. That finance should be aligned with net zero pathways. So that's the key. And that it should be aligned with Paris Agreement goals. And I think the G20 can steer that with its dialogue and with all the major industrial emerging and developed countries being present on the table. So that's the second recommendation I would suggest. And I think maybe the LeadIT colleagues also have.
Dini, we would highly appreciate it if you shared your comments on that.
Yes, I think one aspect that I would point out is the need to raise the profile of industry decarbonization by linking it into finance. That goes a little bit to Dager's point also. There is, for energy, there is a lot of structures already, but industry is in a way a bit behind on that aspect. So I think it's really important to specifically to connect the G20's sustainable finance roadmaps focus area on public finance specifically into the industry decarbonization part of the G20's political track. That's one thing. And then another aspect that I will maybe also mention is the importance of mandates. Everything that I explained on our work on IFIs having specific instruments and programs targeting heavy industry decarbonization eventually comes down to mandates. So sooner or later, it will come down to the question of whether or not MDBs, other IFIs have mandates to come up with such instruments. So that's also very important, I think I would say.
Thank you very much. All good points raised. Do we have any reaction from participants? If not, I shall conclude this event by stressing that decarbonizing the global steel and cement industries require emissions to fall by 90% by 2050. For this to materialize, it is estimated that transition to low carbon technologies would require approximately $200 billion in USD dollars per annum till 2050 for the global steel sector, and more than 1,000 billion US dollars per annum for various decarbonization initiatives. So this backdrop, therefore, reminds us to act collaboratively, to share solidarity and responsibility to support the green transition while building momentum ahead of G20. Please join me in giving a round of applause to our speakers. And thank you very much for your precious contribution.